As the night wraps around you, close your eyes and take a deep breath. Tonight, we follow Era, a curious girl from Mistwood, as she ventures into the fields of dreaming flowers. There, she will face choices that will shape her destiny. Let the calm of the night and the gentle whispers of the flowers guide you into a peaceful sleep. Relax, breathe deeply, and let the story begin. In the village of Mistwood, where the hills grew heavy with twilight mist and the wind carried secrets like whispered prayers, there lived a girl named Era. Era was unlike the other villagers, for she held a gaze that lingered long on the shadows and on the places where paths began and then vanished. She was curious about things best left unmentioned, about stories that only dared to surface when night's hush fell across the village. And more than anything, she was haunted by the tale of the fields of dreaming flowers. Old Jorah, the village storyteller, spoke of the fields only when the moon hung low and pale in the sky, as though afraid of the words themselves. He described a place hidden beyond the mountains, where silvery flowers bloomed in endless clusters, their petals whispering in the night. It was said that those who rested among the flowers would be gifted, or cursed, with dreams that could reveal glimpses of their fate, a glimpse of what the world had yet to reveal to them. But the villagers warned that no one could truly understand what lay within the dreaming fields. It was as if the flowers themselves held a piece of the unknown, something beautiful and terrible all at once. The tale of the fields held Era in its grip, a lure she could not escape. She would lie awake long after everyone else had gone to bed, eyes trained on the distant hills, imagining what might await her beyond them. Some nights, she swore she heard something, a faint call, a sound softer than a whisper, pulling her toward the edge of her world. And though she fought it, ignored it, or tried to reason it away, the call only grew stronger, thrumming through her like the hum of distant thunder. One evening, when dusk cast its long shadows over Mistwood, and the air grew thick with the smell of damp earth, Era felt the call again. This time, it was as if it came from within her bones, as if it had always been there, waiting for her to listen. She could feel it like a pulse, quickening with each breath she took. Something shifted inside her, and in that moment, she knew there would be no turning back. With a quiet resolve, Era gathered a few meager belongings, a small pouch of dried berries, her mother's cloak, and a pendant her grandmother had given her long ago. She slipped through the silent village, each step soft as a breath, until the hills swallowed her in their embrace. She did not look back, for she feared that if she did, she might lose the courage that drove her onward. The journey was strange, a blend of memory and mystery. The forest path seemed to shift beneath her feet, the trees whispering secrets that only deepened the night's silence. Stars appeared, glittering above like watching eyes, and the air grew thick with the scent of unseen blooms, a hint of the fields that lay beyond. Era walked for what felt like days, and yet no time at all. Her heart a steady drumbeat of both fear and longing. At last, she came to the place where the path ended, and a valley stretched out before her, blanketed in an ethereal mist that clung to the ground like smoke. A faint glow illuminated the mist, and she saw them. Countless flowers, each one glowing faintly as if they held a fragment of the moon's light within their petals. They seemed to breathe, to sway even though there was no wind. She felt drawn to them, as if they were old friends welcoming her home. The valley was quiet, but it was not empty. She could feel an energy that hummed beneath her feet, pulsing up through the earth, welcoming her into its embrace. She hesitated at the edge, her hand brushing against a nearby flower. Its petals were soft, almost impossibly so, like a piece of the night sky given form. And then, like a shiver running through her, she felt the invitation to rest among them, to lie down and let the dreams come. The flowers seemed to sigh as she settled among them, their delicate glow bathing her in light. She could feel herself growing heavy, as if sleep itself were creeping up from the roots of the flowers and weaving through her bones. As her eyes began to close, Era thought of the village, of the stories, and of the future she did not yet know. Her heart pounded with the thrill of the unknown, with the trembling awe that perhaps, just perhaps, the flowers would reveal to her what she had always wondered. And as she drifted off, a final thought crossed her mind. Whatever waited for her in the fields of dreaming flowers, it would be more than she could ever have imagined. Era awoke to a world transformed, as if reality itself had unraveled and rewoven itself in delicate threads of twilight and mist. She blinked against the silvery light filtering through the flowers, each petal shimmering like frost-kissed glass. The valley seemed to stretch infinitely around her, bordered by shadows that drifted like living things, watching her with unseen eyes. She rose slowly, brushing off petals that clung to her like forgotten memories. The air was thick with a perfume that felt intoxicating, ancient, and heavy with promises left unsaid. Her footsteps made no sound, and she found herself moving without thought, as if the valley had a path set for her, one that had been waiting for centuries. Around her, the flowers rustled softly, their voices low and musical, like a lullaby sung by the earth itself. She could not understand their words, but she felt them, the hum of their secrets, the weight of their knowing. Somewhere deep in her heart, she understood. These flowers held dreams not only of futures, but of memories, of lives lived and lost, of paths taken and abandoned. She could feel the echoes of 1,000 lives in the petals, each one singing of choices made and unmade. As she wandered deeper into the valley, a peculiar sensation crept over her, an awareness that she was not alone. Shadows drifted along the periphery of her vision, formless but alive. She felt their presence like faint whispers against her skin, ancient eyes watching her, studying her. Yet they did not seem threatening. Rather, they felt like guides, drawing her further into the valley's hidden depths. Her journey led her to a clearing where the flowers grew taller, their colors darkening, their petals rich and vibrant as wine. A single stone, weathered and pale, stood at the center, as though marking a threshold, a silent sentinel guarding the secrets beyond. She approached it, her fingers grazing its surface, and a thrill surged through her, a strange warmth that prickled her skin, an invitation both enticing and unsettling. It was here, she sensed, that she was meant to rest, to let herself surrender to the valley's magic. She knelt among the flowers, feeling the softness of the earth beneath her, the gentle cradle of the petals as they wrapped around her like a lover's embrace. She closed her eyes, and as she did, the world began to slip away, dissolving into a shimmering haze. In this strange in-between, she felt herself drifting, weightless, as if she were floating on the breath of 1,000 dreams. Colors and shapes swirled around her, nebulous and fluid, forming and reforming like the flow of water over stones. She felt herself pulled along, deeper into the current of dreams, surrendering to the valley's ancient rhythm. And then, the visions came. They unfolded before her like scenes from a story she had only glimpsed but never fully read. She saw herself as she had never seen herself before, a figure of shadow and light moving through a world both familiar and strange. She was standing at a crossroads, roads spiraling in every direction like the petals of a great flower. Each path seemed to whisper promises, a future of wealth, of knowledge, of love, of loneliness. One path showed her sitting alone in a small cottage by the sea, her hair streaked with silver, her hands weathered but strong. Another showed her standing tall before a crowd, her voice carrying like thunder, a leader among many. In yet another, she wandered through misted woods, her only company, the shadows and the wind. The images shifted, pulling her deeper into their spell. She saw faces, some familiar, others foreign, each one filled with an intensity that reached out to her, as if begging her to remember them, to hold them close. And then, like a shiver of darkness, she saw the figure cloaked in night, waiting for her in the center of the crossroads. The figure held out a single flower, black as midnight and gleaming with an eerie light. "Choose," it whispered, the words slipping into her mind like a blade hidden beneath silk. She felt the weight of that word, the vastness of it, the infinite branches that spread from that single act. She hesitated, caught between futures, between the lure of the known and the pull of the unknown. But before she could reach for the flower, the vision began to fade, dissolving into mist, slipping from her grasp like sand through her fingers. She felt a pang, a hollow ache as the dream pulled away, leaving her empty and yearning. She reached out, trying to hold on to it, to anchor herself in the dream, but the shadows swept her back, gentle but insistent. The world around her sharpened, the petals beneath her cool and soft once more. She opened her eyes, blinking against the silvery glow of the valley. The flowers around her sighed, their soft voices mingling with the echoes of the dream that still lingered, ghost-like, on the edge of her mind. She felt changed, as though she had glimpsed a part of herself she could never unsee. The figure's whisper echoed within her, haunting and unshakable. Choose. And though she had returned to the waking world, Era knew that choice was now a shadow that would follow her, a thread woven into her soul. The valley waited quiet and watchful as Era rose once more, the weight of the dream settling over her like a cloak. She knew now that she had glimpsed only the beginning, that deeper secrets lay in the heart of the fields, waiting for her to discover them. And with a final steadying breath, she continued on, stepping further into the valley of dreams, knowing that the true journey had only just begun. The path twisted onward, veiled in a thick spectral fog that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Each step Era took echoed with an eerie stillness, a silence that hung over the valley like an ancient spell. She felt as if she were descending, each footfall drawing her deeper, pulling her into a realm where the lines between dreams and waking blurred and mingled, like ink spilled across a page. Around her, the flowers grew in wilder, more chaotic patterns, their petals deepening in color, their glow casting shadows that danced and wove around her like the flickering figures of forgotten stories. She could feel them watching her, or perhaps feeling her, the pulse of her heartbeat, a strange foreign rhythm in their ancient world. At the center of the valley, she came upon a ring of flowers so dark they seemed to drink the very light from the air. Their scent was intoxicating, a blend of sweetness and earthiness, heady and heavy, like the weight of secrets buried in silence. She felt her eyelids grow heavy, her body sinking to the ground as if guided by the flowers themselves. She surrendered, lying among them as the world grew dim, and slowly the veil of dreams descended over her once more. This time, the visions did not ease her into their spell. They seized her, plunging her into a tapestry of vivid scenes, a riot of sensations and images that twisted and danced before her like firelight. She was a child again, standing at the edge of the village, her hands reaching for a figure cloaked in mist, a shadowy echo of herself, guiding her forward. She saw her family, her friends, the familiar faces of her village, but their gazes were hollow, their eyes filled with a strange blank light as they looked at her, through her, beyond her. The scene shifted, and she was older, wandering through darkened woods, beneath a sky dense with stars. She wore a crown woven from flowers, their petals whispering against her skin, filling her ears with a song she did not understand, but felt in her bones. In her hand, she held a single flower, black as a raven's wing, shimmering with an ethereal glow. Around her, shadows gathered, circling her in silence, their faces hidden, their forms indistinct, and yet she knew them, each one a reflection of a choice not yet made, a future that called to her from the depths of time. And then she found herself standing at the edge of a vast lake, its surface dark and still as polished obsidian. She gazed into its depths, and her own face stared back. But it was not her. This was a version of herself she did not recognize. Her eyes older, sharper, filled with secrets she had yet to learn. The figure in the water raised a hand, beckoning her forward, urging her to step into the dark water and let it consume her. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice swallowed by the silence. The reflection smiled, a thin, knowing smile that chilled her to the bone. "I am who you could become," it replied, its voice like the soft brush of leaves in the night. "But only if you dare to claim me." Era felt her heart pound, a mixture of fear and longing twisting within her. The choices lay before her, scattered like fragments of shattered glass, each one glimmering with its own promise, its own shadow. She wanted to reach out, to touch them, to claim them, but as her fingers brushed the water, the image rippled, shattering into 1,000 pieces. She gasped, and the scene shifted once more. She was back in the valley, but it had changed. The flowers towered above her now, strange and looming, their petals darker, richer, almost throbbing with an unseen pulse. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of soil and petals, a heady mixture that filled her lungs, her mind, her very soul. It was then she saw him, the figure cloaked in night, his form indistinct but solid, as if he had been carved from the very shadows themselves. He stood at the edge of her vision, silent and watchful, holding out the dark flower she had seen before. "Choose," he whispered, his voice weaving through her like a chill wind. She felt the weight of that word, the gravity it held, the promise and the threat it offered in equal measure. "But how can I know?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How can I choose a future I do not understand?" The figure tilted his head, his expression hidden, but his gaze piercing. "It is not for you to know," he replied, "only to choose." Era felt a shiver run through her, a thread of understanding beginning to weave itself into her heart. The visions, the choices, the futures, they were not fixed, not yet written in the stone of fate. They were shadows, echoes, reflections that waited for her decision, for her hand to shape them. As she reached out to take the flower, the valley dissolved, slipping away like a receding tide, leaving her breathless and alone. She awoke among the flowers, their delicate glow casting faint shadows across her face. The air was still, the valley silent once more, but the weight of her dreams lingered, heavy and inescapable. And as she rose, Era knew that the revelations she had glimpsed were not mere dreams. They were choices, paths awaiting her steps, destinies she had yet to claim. And as she continued her journey, her heart steady, her spirit sharpened, she knew that her final trial awaited, an awakening that would test her resolve, that would demand of her the courage to choose. Era moved through the valley, feeling as if the land itself had come alive. A quiet yet potent presence that shifted and breathed with each of her steps. The flowers loomed taller, their petals now a dark velvet red, curling like ancient scrolls filled with secrets, their scent deeper, almost bitter. It was as if the valley had drawn her into its heart, and here there would be no turning back. Here she would face her trials. A weight pressed upon her, a feeling both haunting and sacred, as though the valley held something precious, something guarded. She sensed that the visions she had glimpsed, the futures, the choices, the shadows, were not just dreams, but doors, and each door required something of her, a surrender, a reckoning, before it would reveal what lay beyond. The ground beneath her feet shifted, and suddenly, she found herself on a path she recognized but could not name, winding through dark woods thick with silence. The trees rose around her like sentinels, ancient and indifferent, their bark pale as bone. Somewhere deep within the woods, a voice called her name, a faint whisper that wove through the trees, mingling with the sighing of leaves. She followed the sound, each step guided by a force she did not understand, her heart beating in time with the pulse of the valley itself. The whisper grew louder, a murmur at first, then a steady hum that vibrated through her bones. It felt like the heartbeat of something immense, something older than memory, calling her forward. In the clearing ahead, she saw herself, a shadowed version, eyes dark and hollow, dressed in the same cloak she wore, but faded, as though worn thin by time. This shadow self held something in its hand, the dark flower, its petals gleaming with an unnatural sheen. The same flower she had seen in her dreams. The shadow extended the flower towards her, its expression unreadable, and Era felt a shiver pass through her. She knew in the depths of her being that this was the first trial. The trial of facing herself, of facing the version of herself that had wandered the path of fear and regret. The version that had turned away from choice, that had surrendered into shadow. "Will you take it?" the shadow self asked, its voice echoing like a distant memory. "Will you let fear shape your fate?" Era felt the weight of the question, a heaviness that settled deep within her. She had been afraid of the unknown, of what the valley would demand of her, of the futures she might lose in choosing one path over another. But as she gazed into the hollow eyes of her shadow, she understood that to surrender to fear was to let her life be shaped by shadows, by futures never fully lived. "No," she whispered, her voice steady, her heart unwavering. "I will not let fear decide for me." The shadow smiled, a faint bittersweet expression, and dissolved into mist, leaving the flower in her hand. She felt its weight, delicate yet heavy with meaning, and tucked it close to her heart, a token of the trial she had passed. The path shifted again, and now she found herself in a vast, empty field, the sky dark above her, as if all the stars had gathered to bear witness. In the center of the field stood a figure, a cloaked man, his face hidden, holding a mirror. He held it out to her, his silence speaking louder than words. She approached, her breath shallow, feeling the pull of the mirror like a tether around her heart. She gazed into the mirror and saw herself, but not as she was. She saw a version of herself, wise and alone, a woman who had chosen knowledge and solitude over companionship, who had walked the path of wisdom but left behind the warmth of human connection. Her reflection's eyes were filled with understanding, but also a profound loneliness, a solitude that had grown with each year until it encased her like stone. The figure spoke, its voice low and resonant. "Wisdom comes with a price. Are you willing to pay it?" Era's heart trembled. She saw the allure of that path, the peace of knowledge, the quiet of a life spent in contemplation. But she also saw the shadows of those she would leave behind, the people she would lose, the warmth she would trade for the cold beauty of wisdom. "No," she replied, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Not at the cost of love." The figure nodded, lowering the mirror, and the image faded, the field dissolving back into the valley. Era felt both lighter and heavier, as if a part of herself had been shed, while something deeper, truer, had taken root within her heart. Finally, she returned to the heart of the valley where the dark flower awaited her, its petals shimmering in the moonlight. She reached out, feeling the warmth of it, the pulse of something alive, something ancient and fierce, waiting to be claimed. "Choose," the valley seemed to whisper, the word rustling through the flowers, echoing through her very soul. Era took a deep breath, the weight of all she had seen, all she had surrendered and gained, settling within her like a steady flame. She knew now that choice was not merely a decision. It was a path, a promise, a journey that would shape her beyond the limits of her dreams. With a final, resolute breath, she accepted the flower, pressing it to her heart, feeling its warmth, its life, merging with her own. She had faced herself, her fears, her shadows, and emerged whole, not bound to any one destiny, but free to weave her path with courage and purpose. And as the valley's light faded, She felt its blessing settle upon her, a promise that whatever lay ahead, she would face it with open eyes and an open heart. Era stepped out of the valley as dawn stretched its first pale fingers over the world, the dark flower still clasped close to her heart, warm as a pulse. The fields of dreaming flowers lay behind her, silent and still, as if the valley had retreated back into its own mysteries, content now that its purpose had been fulfilled. The air felt new, shimmering with an energy she had not sensed before, like an unspoken promise held within the bones of the earth. Each step felt lighter, her heart unburdened yet profoundly aware of the weight she carried. Not a weight of a doubt, but of understanding. She was changed, a river reshaped by the stones of its own path, flowing deeper and truer with every bend. As she approached the edge of the forest, where the familiar path to her village waited, Era became aware of how the world seemed to breathe around her, as though the very earth recognized her return. She felt the village close, the life she'd left behind only days before, now waiting like a half-forgotten memory. And yet, nothing felt the same. She was no longer the girl who had left, filled with questions and shadows. She returned as one who carried the weight of choice, of destiny's invitation, with grace. Era's footsteps slowed as she neared the familiar homes of her village, smoke curling from chimneys, the faint hum of early morning voices breaking the quiet. The villagers paused as she passed, their gazes curious, uncertain, as if sensing a change in her, a shift in the air itself. She offered them a gentle nod, feeling the pulse of the dark flower's energy thrumming beneath her hand. It was a part of her now, this strange, delicate blossom, an emblem of the choices she had made, the fears she had faced, the destinies she had glimpsed and shaped with her own hands. At the heart of the village, old Jorah sat beneath his gnarled oak, his eyes sharp with an ancient wisdom that was all too familiar. He watched her approach, his gaze flickering with a knowing that made her pause. She met his eyes, and in that moment, she understood. He had once walked the path she had taken. He too had ventured into the valley, faced its trials, and emerged bearing the weight of choice. "You returned," he murmured, his voice soft, each word laden with meaning. "Yes," she replied, her voice as quiet as the dawn. "I have returned." He regarded her, his expression one of quiet pride. "Then you have seen the truth of the fields, the choice that lies within each of us." Era nodded, feeling the memories of the valley stir within her. "I have seen that fate is not a chain, but a thread, one that we can weave with our own hands." Old Jorah's lips curved into a faint smile. "Then you know more than most, child. The valley gives its visions to those who seek, but the courage to claim them, to shape them, that is the true test." Era felt the weight of his words settle over her, a soft cloak of understanding woven from the very fabric of her heart. I do not know what the future holds, not entirely, she said, her voice thoughtful. But I know that it is mine to shape, to choose. The elder's gaze softened, his face lined with the memories of his own journey, his own choices. Remember that the path is not one of certainty, but of courage. The valley has shown you what lies within, but only you can bring it to life. She felt the dark flower pulse once more, a quiet reminder of her journey, her choices, and the destinies she had glimpsed. Its petals were no longer an enigma, but a part of her, a symbol of her newfound strength, her understanding of the delicate, powerful bond between fate and free will. And as the villagers returned to their lives, as the morning light grew stronger, Erin knew she was ready to walk her path, to face each day with the wisdom the valley had gifted her, the courage it had demanded, and the love she had chosen. As she turned toward her home, she felt the valley's presence linger, a soft whisper woven into the wind, a blessing carried from the depths of the dreaming flowers. And she knew that wherever her path led, she would walk it with open eyes, a heart attuned to the mysteries of the world and the freedom to choose her destiny with every step. Thus, the legend of the fields of dreaming flowers lived on, not as a story of fate, but as a story of courage. A tale told to those who, like Era, would one day feel the pull of the valley and the call to shape their own destinies.